SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar, I am Professor Devdip Purkayastha from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. And welcome to this course. Before I get into today's module, let me quickly recap the course structure. So we'll start with something which I call disciplined innovation. As you will see, it's a step-by-step, very structured way of innovating. Whether you're a student, you're a researcher, you're heading a research lab, or you are a working professional working in brand management, product management, R&D management, or you are an entrepreneur or an MSME business owner trying to innovate a new product and launch it in the market. After today, we'll get into the different aspects and modules of discipline innovation. We'll start with a very important module of problem discovery. A lot of startups, companies, businesses, MSMEs, researchers, innovators often work on the wrong problem. A problem which has already been solved, or a problem which is not relevant or scalable or meaningful today. After the problem discovery, we'll have a module around product development, all the way from creating a value proposition to large-scale manufacturing. We'll then talk about how to win in the market. Once you have done the problem discovery, you've discovered a problem that customers have or the market has, and you've created a product or a solution, how do you win in the market? Because the market is very complex, very noisy place and with lots and lots of players. So how do you win in the market? And then we'll move into what are more deeper tech, longer gestation, more intense technologies. And as we move into those modules, we'll talk about how do you assess your technology and how do you translate your research or your technology into a meaningful, industry-relevant, used by many people, product or a solution. So those modules are around translational research, how to translate, how to assess your technology. You'll see some frameworks which I'll talk today, and you'll hear about it in more details in the actual modules. And then how to commercialize in different pathways, license, co-develop, or just sell your patent or your research or your product or your technology. And we'll end the course with a capstone project where we'll provide you certain tools, and they will be AI assisted. And you can use those tools to actually further develop your research, your technology, your prototype into a real, meaningful, scalable product in the real world, used by many people. So that's kind of the course structure. And today is the first module on discipline innovation. I will introduce you to the concept of discipline innovation. This is something which I have been using. This framework is something which I have been using in other courses, in IIT, with my students, with aspiring entrepreneurs, And I'd like to share that with you in this module today. Let me start by talking of something which I call accelerated startup discovery process, which I've been using with my students at IIT and in other forums like aspiring entrepreneurs outside of IIT, etc. So this process, the ASDP process, actually spans the entire life cycle of a startup or a commercialization of technology. I have a small book on that and have shared it across the country, and separately there will be a module which talks more detailed about the ASDP process itself. But for today, let's talk about why do we need these processes like ASDP? Why do you have to acquire the skills around technology management, new product development, especially if you're an engineer, if you're a scientist, if you're a commerce graduate, science graduate? Why do you need these different skill sets? Let's start with new product success rates. Ultimately, there's basic research. A basic research may be research which is done not to actually use it in a particular way. So it doesn't start with a problem that needs to be solved. It's just basic research. It could be on atomic theory, it could be on quantum, it could be on semiconductors, it could be on materials, chemicals. It's just basic research. And then you have applied research. And you apply your research with a particular objective to create a new product, to create a new use case, to create an impact on the country, to create a meaningful social intervention. And we have got, even in India, missions. We've got the quantum mission, we've got the semiconductor mission, you've got drones, robotics, defense, etc. So if you look at the application of technology, this could be the highest of technology, like semiconductors or quantum. It could be application of affordable technology, food processing, fishery, farm products, forest products, whatever be it. If you look at the application of technology into new products, innovative products, and if you just look at how many of those products succeed, you can see the numbers on the screen. Take a minute to pause here and read what's on the screen. So the largest global researcher in the world, Nielsen, did some surveys in 11, 12, and they continue to do surveys around the world in terms of new product success rates. And there have been studies in Harvard about new product success rates in US and so on. But the net summary is that if companies, and this could be large companies, this could be large Indian companies, multinational companies, it could be a startup, it could be an MSME. If you look at the success rates of new products, is minuscule in terms of breakthrough innovation. You can launch a product and you can get some sales and you can make some profits and you can have some customers. But breakthrough, innovative product, the success rate is very small, less than 1%. And you can see the data, and the link is there, and you can read up the data. And sometimes you wonder why. Why does a new product, it can be from a very successful large company or an MSME or a very energetic, innovative entrepreneur. Why can a new product not add to the revenue line or the profit line or sustain over time? So that's what something I want all of you to think about, and we'll have a small journal exercise But think about why new products don't succeed. Why such low, less than 1% success rate? Now, related to new product is also businesses, new businesses, which is of relevance to all of you who are watching who want to create a new business. A startup is also a new business. As we all know, in India it's difficult to start a new business for various reasons. The market is large, but the competition is very tough. The compliance required are very high. But if you don't look at India, if you just look at a developed market, in fact the largest market in the world, the largest economy in the world, US. And if you take a minute to pause the video and look at the data on the screen, you will see that the failure rate or closure rate, which means you have started a business and you are forced to close the business. And remember, these are not necessarily technology startups. This is general business data from the US, and the link is there at the bottom. So what is the failure rate over 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Most businesses that start don't sustain. Of course, there are many reasons for it, not necessarily only product or technology related reason, but it could be a financial reason, it could be a team or a founder or an owner reason, it could be a compliance reason, it could be just running out of money reason. But you can see that it's challenging to start a business and sustain a business. Now, if you come to the technology startup where there is a novel process or a novel idea or a novel technology or a novel research, the failure rate is also high. I think all of you know that. Question is, why do the startups fail? So here's a study, and the link is there at the bottom. And if you again pause the screen for a while and look at the data, you'll find that many of the times the businesses, the startups, run out of money. Why do they run out of money? Because the customers are not buying it. And why the customers not buying? Because they've got alternate solutions. So there is no market demand. And if there's no market demand, customers are not buying it. Sooner or later, the business or the startup will die. And if the customers are not there, the investors are not there. So there's nobody willing to invest in a business because there's no customers. And sometimes you get outcompeted because you're trying to solve a problem which others have solved much long time back, or much better, or much faster, or much cheaper. And therefore, there's no demand for your product. And you can go down the list. There can be team problems. The founders have a conflict and the breakup. There could be compliance issues, and so on. The accelerated startup process covers the entire journey. Given the challenges of new product success, the challenges of new business success, the challenges of new startup success, the challenges of converting research into new products, the ASDP is something which I've been using for almost 10 years now at IIT Bombay. It's a very structured way which starts from the team formation itself all the way down to plugging your startup into an ecosystem. And I'll talk you through that in a minute. But before I get into discipline innovation, which impacts part of the stages of ASDP, okay, do understand the big picture of new product launch, new business launch, and sustain new startups, conversion of research into technology. So these are some of the challenges. The ASDP, I use it to teach, mentor my students and learners and aspiring entrepreneurs and MSMEs to actually use it for managing their business. Let's take a break here now and take a few minutes to think about a product or a service that you use. Any product. It could be a food, it could be technology, it could be a software, it could be a clothing, it could be an electronic gadget, it could be a fancy fashion item, whatever be it. Think about a product that you use over a period of time, not something which you have used and not used afterwards, but something which you have been used. It could be a detergent, it could be cream, it could be an OTT channel. So think about products and services that you use and think about why do you use those products and services over a period of time. Because as you think about yourself using product and service over a period of time, you'll start probably appreciating how does the manufacturer or the researcher or the entrepreneur or the company offer that to you. And the ASTP process is geared towards supporting that entire life cycle of a successful new product, new business. So let me pause here. I would advise all of you to please have a journal where you take down notes so that you can appreciate and internalize what I've said. So what are the 12 stages of the accelerated startup process and what are the 3 principles? The 3 principles which I have learned based on my experiences with working with tens of venture teams, hundreds of aspiring entrepreneurs, some successful, some not so successful, and maybe 1,000 or more students. The 3 principles, first is customer centricity. Working with the customer to understand what their problems are, what their needs are, and then developing your business, your new product, or your applied research to solve the problems of the customers. If you're doing basic research, you may not really have to worry. And we'll see later on when you do a technology push, which means a basic research, a basic technology, which is really breakthrough, like mRNA vaccines, which was in the research stage for a very long time. And then when the COVID came in 2019, 2020, about 5-6 years back, the mRNA was pushed out to the whole world. So that's a great example of very long gestation, clinical product, research stage, but pushed out as soon as there's a customer problem. You can still do basic research, but if you're doing applied research or you're in business or a startup, the first principle of the ASDP is customer centricity. The second principle is iterative execution. So there are 2 parts to it. First is iterative, which means you keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. You don't do it once and stop. It could be a product design, a prototype design, a first cut solution. It could be a brand proposition, an advertising, this content, a Facebook post, or it could be just finding out about a customer problem. You start once, talk to the customer, get feedback, quickly come back and refine it. Then go back to the customer, quickly refine, come back, and quickly iterate. And the second part of that is execution. Many entrepreneurs, many students, many researchers think that I have an idea, I have a research paper, I have a research output, I have got a prototype, and that's enough. So the idea needs to be executed. So it has to be executed. A startup, a business, an MSME is all about execution. So it's iterative execution. And it has to be discovery driven, because when you start, whether you start with a research hypothesis or a customer problem hypothesis or a proof of concept hypothesis or a technology hypothesis or a marketing, branding, advertising hypothesis or a unit economic hypothesis, you still need to discover it. You have done it once doesn't mean it's correct. So you have to keep discovering. And how do you discover? You talk to your stakeholder, most of all your customers. And these three principles work like a continuous perpetual activity. Therefore, they're interlinked and they keep going through the life cycle of this thing. And many products, many businesses fail because they have created a product and they don't iterate. And they get stuck and they don't change and they don't adapt and they don't evolve, and therefore they fail. But if you follow these three key principles, chances of your success, your product success, your research application, your MSME goes up. So what are the 12 stages? The 12 stages of the accelerated startup discovery process starts with you and the team. Because whether you're a brand manager, or R&D manager, product manager, a CEO, a marketing head, an operations head of a large company, or you're an MSME owner, or you're a micro entrepreneur, or a research lab head, or a researcher, or a student or a faculty, it starts with you. It starts with you in the sense that you need to acquire very different skills of commercialization, technology management, and new product development than physics, chemistry, math. Those skills are important. Medicine, engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, algorithm, AI, ML, those are all technical skills. They are important. They're domain skills. But there's a whole different skill sets which you need to be aware of and develop, or at least have founders who have those skills. So you may be a great technology person, but you still need to have someone who is great on marketing and someone who's great on finance and someone who's great on operations. So it starts with the self and the team. Then you get, once you've got yourself keyed up, trained, aware, and you formed a team, a founder's team, then the key is to go out to the market, go out to the customer and find their customer problem and persona. Who is the customer? What problem do they have? Most importantly, are they willing to pay for it? And then you find out who else is there in the market. How big is the market? Is it scalable? And who are the competitors? Because the customers may have a need, but there may be other competitors. Or the market may be very large or very small. And then you start developing, once you have got your customer feedback, your market sizing, and your competitive landscape, you need to start developing a value proposition. A value proposition for the customer. A value proposition which the customer is willing to pay. And once you have got the value proposition, you start developing the solution. And you will find that these three steps and the few other steps will get into the discipline innovation side. Because you have to do all of this in a very disciplined way. And then once you've got your value proposition and your solution, you still have to have a brand. Because you need to call your product, a new business. Or your commercialized research, something. You need to have a name for it, which is a brand. Then you need to spread the word, advertise it. You have to position it versus other similar competitors or products. And as you do all of this, you need to make sure that your economics, the cost of production, the cost of delivery per unit is something that you're aware of, because you have to price it to make money. So once you get to unit economics which are competitive, then you can price it to make money. Because if your unit economics are out of whack, out of sync, you will never make money, because you also have to make money. It's not enough to just get revenues. You have to make money, if not on the first year, if not on the second year, if not on the third year, at least fourth year, fifth year, sixth year. Long term, you have to make money. So these are the first 6 stages. And you'll see later on how the discipline innovation helps you do all of these in a very structured, systematic way. So moving on, once you have got your customer problem, customer persona identified, your value proposition, and your solution design, as well as your unit economics validated through iterative execution. Question is, how do you take it to market? So that's the go to market. And once you have successfully gone to market, the question is, how do you scale? Whilst you do all of this, there are also other things that you need to do. You need to be clear on a business model. And you need to build capacity, whether it's a factory, whether it's a team, whether it's employees, to scale and grow. It's one thing to sell 1 crore or $1 million. It's another thing to sell 100 crores, 1,000 crores, or 100 million, 1,000 million, 1 billion worth of products and services. So the growth plans. There are also housekeeping and legal and compliance activities such as registering the company, choosing the company structure, at some point planning for an IPO, raising continuous funds as you grow. If you are already a company, if you work in a company, it will probably be your internal funds of that company. But if you're a startup, you need to look for external funding. Or if you're an MSME, you may not have the internal funds. And if you're a student or a researcher, in the early stages, you need to go to an incubator or get some grants, research grants or student grants. And then plug into the India startup ecosystem. It could be a national mission like quantum or semiconductors. It could be one of the ministries, the rural ministry, tribal ministry, forest, MSME. Also plug into the startup India with all the schemes and resources. Tie up with an incubator at the early stage. So all of this covers the life cycle of a startup. And some of these which are related to directly to the customer, the product, the solution, and the go-to-market will be covered under discipline innovation. Just to recap, here are some of the outcomes which you should try and achieve in an iterative way, not just once, but in an iterative way, because you have to keep adjusting. You have to keep adapting. You have to keep evolving. You have to keep growing. Each of those stages over 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years, 20 years. As I said, make sure that your team is strong. That's the starting point. That's the ASDP stage number 1. Make sure you've got a specific user segment. If you're a large company, you can launch nationally. You can launch a product for everybody in India, everybody in the world. If you're a Google or Microsoft or a Tata Group or Birla Group or a French or a European, a very large company, you can launch a product globally, nationally. But if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a researcher, if you're an MSME owner, you have to be very clear on a segment of customer, a segment of the market, solve that problem, and then gradually expand. And all along you have to keep an idea of the competitors and the markets. And be very clear about the customer value proposition, and then get into the solution design, the proof of concepts, etc. I've talked about branding, positioning, advertising. In the later modules, winning in market, you will see some ideas, some tools, some frameworks to do all of these activities. And then your unit economics, your cost structures. We'll talk about it in the later modules. Go-to-market plan. What are your channels of distribution? Are you going to do B2B, business to business, B2C, business to consumer, D2C, direct to consumer, online, offline, aggregators? How will you go to market? How will you reach a product and solution to the market? E-commerce platform, etc. And then how will you scale? People, money, infrastructure, office space, factories, machinery, laboratories. How will you scale? Supply chain, suppliers. packaging material, raw material, how will you scale? And then your business model, how will you price yourself? Are you going to do cost plus pricing, value pricing, subscription pricing, open book pricing? And your growth strategy, because it's not enough to grow the sales. It's not enough to grow the sales. You have to also grow your profits. And as I said, along the way, you have to decide what's your company structure. Will it be a one-man company, a private limited company, a partnership, LLP? When will you go public? By doing an IPO? What are the steps to registering a company? How do you get more and more funds as you grow your business? If you are profitable, if you've got a high margins, which means your percentage of profits to percentage of sales is high, you may not need external funding like Zoho, etc. But chances are you will need funding to grow, to hire people, to hire equipment. And then how to plug into the various schemes, various infrastructure, various ecosystem in India, or if you are in other countries, in that countries or the global ecosystem, like incubators, Y Combinator in US, or any of the IIT incubators in India. There are about 100. In any of the big cities, there are about 1,000 to 1,200 across India. How to plug into those government schemes? So supporting the entire life cycle of the ASDP process is something which I've also used with my students and aspiring entrepreneurs, is the discipline innovation. But what is discipline innovation? It basically covers the stages of the ASDP process, not the entire life cycle, but the stages which related to customers, the product and solution, the technology and the market. And therefore, it's a bundle of frameworks. And I will talk about it in the later module. The first framework is the problem discovery framework. In a very structured way, finding the problem that you want to solve. I call it the 8C problem discovery framework. Once you've got your problem and a value proposition, how to develop your product, not just in the lab stage, all the way up to designing for manufacturing, designing for supply chain ease or optimizing supply chain costs, or making sure that you've got a supply base right. So the product development process. Then the winning in market framework. Branding, advertising, pricing, channels, etc. Now that's if you have a customer problem, a market problem that you want to solve. But you may be a deep tech researcher. There may not be an immediate need for your research. For example, mRNA vaccine. The COVID mRNA vaccine was in research stage for a very long time, till COVID hit the world. And then it became a multi-billion-dollar technology push initiative. Pfizer, or in India, AstraZeneca, or the Serum Institute in India, and so on around the world. So a lot of times you may be doing basic research which then gets applied as soon as a problem comes up. But then you still have to assess your technology. There has to be an assessment framework for your technology. How ready is your technology to be deployed? Are you still at the concept stage, etc.? So there is a framework called TRL, which is a global framework, also adopted in India, and we'll talk about it. And then we'll talk about translational research. How to translate and how to commercialize. So this is the scope of discipline innovation, and this is what we'll really talk about in this course. You will also have access to a whole scorecard which you can use to assess how ready you are and how far you are down the path of managing your research, your technology, or launching a new product. So these are the discipline innovation key elements, which will talk problem discovery, product development, winning in market, technology assessment, technology translation, and commercialization. Many of you would have heard the term about translational research. It came out mostly from very long gestation clinical research. But then slowly it has got adopted into mainstream research, and today many of the IITs, IISc in India, and many of the overseas top academic institutions, research lab, have applied those stage research to translate their lab research, their applied research, or even the basic research into real-world applications. And this book that you can see, there's a playbook, the FAST playbook. There's a link, you can look for it yourself. And this book actually highlights the work that is being done across some of the top educational institutes and labs across India, some of the IITs, IISc, and so on. I strongly encourage all of you to download this from the link that is below and have a look and read through what's happening in that area. But in this course, we will cover that. The other thing which we'll also cover is the TRL, which is called Technology Readiness Level. It basically assesses how ready is your technology to be used in mainstream. It came out of NASA for space crafts, and starting from a lab, a classroom, or a researcher idea, and it goes stage by stage all the way from TRL levels 1, 2, which are mostly concept level, 3, 4, which are basically around the proof of concept, and then you get into working with industry in real world situation, and you keep refining it. So start with maybe the concept of a space station, or the concept of a medical device, a sophisticated drug delivery medical device maybe, or the concept of a molecule or a quantum, and then it goes through stages into a real product, a real application, which is used by billions of people. And we'll cover that in this course. Now, before we end, I'd like you to think about product and services which you don't use. You have seen them, but you don't use them. Or you have used them once and you did not use them. It could be a high-tech device, it could be an application, it could be a phone, it could be a PlayStation, or it could be a consumer goods, a television, new kind of television, or it could be mass consumer goods, like a new flavor of toothpaste, jam, food, farm product, forest products, or it could be a service, a software, or an app, or an AI. There are many, many, many AI applications coming. Not all of them are popular. Even amongst the big LLMs, some are more popular. OpenAI, ChatGPT may be more popular than some of the others. The question is, which are the ones that you don't use, and why do you not use it? So I'd asked you to think about the ones that you use, and now I'm asking you to think about the ones that you don't use. And as you start thinking with yourself, being the consumer, with yourself being the customer, yourself being the user, yourself being the buyer, you will start realizing maybe what are the things the brand manager, the product manager, the R&D manager in a company, or the MSME owner, or the student, or the researcher should have thought about and have either actually thought about it so that you are using the product, you think it's a great product, or have not done it, and therefore there are some gaps. The solution is badly designed. It's not reliable. It's bulky. It doesn't look nice. It doesn't smell nice. It doesn't taste nice. It's too slow. The app is too expensive. And as you start putting yourself in the shoes of a user, consumer, buyer, customer, you'll start realizing the power of the ASDP process, and within the ASDP process, the power of discipline innovation, so that when you do that, when you launch your product, when you commercialize your technology, when you license your patent, when you co-develop it with an industry, you succeed. So this was an introduction to the discipline innovation, which we'll talk about in the other modules of the course. With that, we've come to the end of this module. Thank you. Namaskar. Good luck.